Removing the flag from the state's capital would not be an act of political correctness. It would not be an insult to the valor of Confederate soldiers. It would simply be an acknowledgement that the cause for which they fought, the cause of slavery, was wrong. The imposition of Jim Crow after the Civil War, the resistance to civil rights for all people, was wrong. It would be one step in an honest accounting of America's history. A modest but meaningful balm for so many unhealed wounds. It would be an expression of the amazing changes that have transformed the state and this country for the better. Because of the work of so many people of goodwill, people of all races striving to form a more perfect union. By taking down that flag, we express God's grace. But I don't think God wants us to stop there. For too long, we've been blind to the way past injustices continue to shape the present. Perhaps we see that. Now, perhaps this tragedy causes us to ask some tough questions about how we can permit so many of our children to languish in poverty. Or attend dilapidated schools, or grow up without prospects for a job or for a career. Perhaps it causes us to examine what we're doing to cause some of our children to hate. Perhaps it softens hearts towards those lost young men, tens and tens of thousands caught up. In the criminal justice system, and leads us to make sure that that system is not infected with bias. That we embrace changes in how we train and equip our police so that the bonds of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve make us all safer and more secure. Maybe we now realize the way racial bias can infect us even when we don't realize it. So that we're guarding against not just racial slurs, but we're also guarding against the subtle impulse to call Johnny back for a job interview but not Jamal. So that we search our hearts when we consider laws to make it harder for some of our fellow citizens to vote. By recognizing our common humanity, by treating every child as important. Regardless of the color of their skin or the station into which they were born. And to do what's necessary to make opportunity real for every American. By doing that, we express God's grace. For too long. Audience, for too long. President Obama, for too long, we've been blind to the unique mayhem that gun violence inflicts upon this nation. Sporadically, our eyes are open, when 8 of our brothers and sisters are cut down in a church basement. "12 in a movie theater, 26 in an elementary school. But I hope we also see the 30 precious lives cut short by gun violence in this country every single day. The countless more whose lives are forever changed, the survivors crippled, the children traumatized and fearful every day as they walk to school. The husband who will never feel his wife's warm touch. The entire communities whose grief overflows every time they have to watch what happened to them happen to some other place. The vast majority of Americans, the majority of gun owners, want to do something about this. We see that now. And I'm convinced that by acknowledging the pain and loss of others, even as we respect the traditions and ways of life that make up this Beloved country, by making the moral choice to change, we express God's grace. We don't earn grace. We're all sinners. We don't deserve it. But God gives it to us anyway. And we choose how to receive it. It's our decision how to honor it. None of us can or should expect a transformation in race relations overnight. Every time something like this happens, somebody says we have to have a conversation about race. We talk. A lot about race. There's no shortcut. And we don't need more talk. None of us should believe that a handful of gun safety measures will prevent every tragedy. It will not. People of goodwill will continue to debate the merits of various policies, as our democracy requires. This is a big, raucous place, America is. And there are good people on both sides of these debates. Whatever solutions we find will necessarily be incomplete. But it would be a betrayal of everything Reverend Pinckney stood for. I believe, if we allowed ourselves to slip into a comfortable silence again. Once the eulogies have been delivered, once the TV cameras move on. To go back to business as usual, that's what we so often do to avoid uncomfortable truths about the prejudice that still infects our society. To settle for symbolic gestures without following up with the hard work of more lasting change. That's how we lose our way again. It would be a refutation of the forgiveness expressed by those families if we merely slipped into old habits. Whereby those who disagree with us are not merely wrong but bad, where we shout instead of listen. Where we barricade ourselves behind preconceived notions or well-practiced cynicism. Reverend Pinckney once said, across the South. We have a deep appreciation of history. We haven't always had a deep appreciation of each other's history. What is true in the South is true for America. Clem understood that justice grows out of recognition of ourselves in each other. That my liberty depends on you being free, too. That history can't be a sword to justify injustice, or a shield against progress. But must be a manual for how to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, how to break the cycle. A roadway toward a better. World. He knew that the path of grace involves an open mind, but, more importantly, an open heart. That's what I felt this week, an open heart. That, more than any particular policy or analysis, is what's called upon right now. I think what a friend of mine, the writer Marilyn Robinson, calls that reservoir of goodness. Beyond, and of another kind, that we are able to do each other in the ordinary cause of things. That reservoir of goodness. If we can find that grace, anything is possible. If we can tap that grace, everything can change. Amazing grace. Amazing grace. Begins to sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind but now I see. Clementa Pinckney found that grace. Cynthia Hurd found that grace. Susie Jackson found that grace. Ethel Lance found that grace. DePayne Middleton Doctor found that grace. T. Winsor Sanders found that grace. Daniel L. Simmons, Sr. found that grace. Sharonda Coleman Singleton found that grace. Myra Thompson found that grace. Through the example of their lives, they've now passed it on to us. May we find ourselves worthy of that precious and extraordinary gift, as long as our lives endure. May grace now lead them home. May God continue to shed His grace on the United States of America. (1 Hebrews 11:13). Barack Obama. Address at the Clinton Global Initiative on Human Trafficking. Delivered September 25, 2012. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And, President Clinton, thank you for your very kind introduction. Although I have to admit, I really did like the speech a few weeks ago a little bit better. Afterwards, somebody tweeted that somebody needs to make him Secretary of Explaining Things. Although they didn't use the word, things. President Clinton, you are a tireless, passionate advocate on behalf of what's best in our country. You have helped to improve and save the lives of millions of people around the world. I am grateful for your friendship and your extraordinary leadership. And I think I speak for the entire country when we say that you continue to be a great treasure for all of us. As always, I also have to thank President Clinton for being so understanding. With the record-breaking number of countries visited by our Secretary of State. As we've seen again in recent days, Hillary Clinton is a leader of grace and grit, and I believe she will go down as one of the finest secretaries of state in American history. So we are grateful to her. To the dedicated CGI staff and every organization that's made commitments and touched the lives of hundreds of millions of people, thank you for being an example of what we need more of in the world. Especially in Washington, working together to actually solve problems. And that's why I'm here. As Bill mentioned, I've come to CGI every year that I've been president. And I've talked with you about how we need to sustain the economic recovery, how we need to create more jobs. I've talked about the importance of development from global health to our fight against HIV/AIDS to the growth that lifts nations to prosperity. We've talked about development and how it has to include women and girls because by every benchmark, nations that educate their women and girls end up being more successful. And today, I want to discuss an issue that relates to each of these challenges. It ought to concern every person, because it is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community, because it tears at our social fabric. It ought to concern every business, because it distorts markets. It ought to concern every nation, because it endangers public health and fuels violence and organized crime. I'm talking about the injustice, the outrage, of human trafficking. Which must be called by its true name: modern slavery.